In Tears of the Kingdom, the temples, also known as the dungeons, are one of, if not the most important aspect in the game. Imagining a Zelda game without a temple is like imagining a Mario game without mushrooms, or a Pokemon game with actually enjoyable gameplay. There are 4 real temples worth talking about and ranking in Tears of the Kingdom. There is also the Spirit Temple, but it doesn't have any puzzles and sends you straight into a boss fight, so I'm not going to talk about it. I guess Hyrule Castle also technically counts as a dungeon, but this video is talking specifically about the temples. With all that out of the way, let's get to the ranking and go straight into our number 4 spot. At the very bottom of my ranking is the Fire Temple. I know a lot of people actually like this temple quite a bit, and I don't think it's terrible or anything, but I thought that the temple was far too boring for me to put any higher than the bottom. The gameplay was really boring when trying to play the intended way with the minecarts, and the temple is beyond easy since you can use Ascent to cheese through all of it. Cheesing a puzzle on its own isn't a problem, but cheesing a puzzle shouldn't break the entire temple, which in this case it does. I don't know if they forgot Ascend was an ability they added, or if they noticed and didn't mind, but either way, I didn't enjoy exploring the temple. It's also not a thematically cool temple either. I think that all of the temples have something unique to the theming that I enjoy a lot, except for the Fire Temple. It isn't exactly a bad idea to do the temple in the scorching hot underground, but it isn't anything I found interesting. I thought the ancient feeling was done a lot better in the Construct Factory later in the game. Since we're judging the temples as a whole, it's also worth talking about the boss fight, which in this case is the Marbled Goma. This is definitely my favorite part about the Fire Temple. Sure, the boss fight is pretty easy, but Marbled Goma looks awesome and the fight lasted short enough for me to enjoy it. I can't remember if I even took damage during this fight, but I had fun and that's what matters. I absolutely loved the lead up to the Fire Temple, but this video isn't about the lead up or the questline as a whole. It's about the temple, which in this case is pretty mediocre, and I'm not even gonna get started on Unibo. At our number 3 slot we have the Lightning Temple. I've seen a whole lot of people saying this is their favorite, which I completely understand. This temple is certainly the most puzzle oriented of them all, and made me think a lot more than the other puzzles. It isn't on par with the old temples in old Zelda games in terms of puzzle solving, but the puzzles are a lot more complicated than anything else in Tears of the Kingdom, or even Breath of the Wild. This temple probably took me well over an hour, which is a lot more time than the other ones took. I also think the old desert pyramid atmosphere was done really well, and made the temple a lot more enjoyable. At first I was worried, since a creepy desert pyramid is a common trope and has been done a million times now, but Nintendo made it work. The Gyptos are a perfect enemy for this type of temple, and everything works really well together. The old, abandoned feel for the temple is done well, especially when compared to the Fire Temple. The biggest downside to this temple is definitely the boss, Queen Gypto. This boss fight does nothing but take up time. It's a little harder than the other bosses, but it's not a difficult boss by any means. The real difficulty is having to sit through this whole boss fight until it's finally over. The more I think and talk about this temple, the more I like it. And there's a good chance that in a few months it could become my number 2, or even get put at the top of my list. It's important to mention that every temple is far better than the Fire Temple, and I can see the appeal to every other temple. It'll be interesting to see how things pan out when I do a second playthrough. I'll probably rate the Lightning Temple a lot higher, but for now, it's at number 3. At my number 2 slot, we have the Water Temple. Now, I already know that a lot of people aren't going to like this, since it seems the Water Temple is at the bottom of a lot of people's lists. But there are a few reasons I personally like it a lot. In terms of puzzle solving, it's like most of the other temples, and the puzzles are pretty simple. Although, there is this one part where you need to enter QuickTime with your bow and shoot something in order to progress, which I thought was a pretty awesome puzzle. I think something about the low gravity gave me a huge bias towards this temple. I spent a lot of time doing nothing but jumping around with the low gravity. Something about it is just so satisfying. This is a temple that I think really benefits from the atmosphere. I'm not a feelsy player who likes to get immersed into the world, but something about the Water Temple was so calming. The music starts out extremely calm and simple, and gradually adds more complexity to the song as you progress through the temple. This is called layering, and it makes the temple that much cooler. There's a good chance that the songs in the other temples also take advantage of layering, but if they did, I didn't notice it. The calm and disconnected atmosphere really made me like the Water Temple, and it definitely has my favorite atmosphere of all the temples. Now it's time to talk about the boss, Moktarok. I've seen a lot of people say that Moktarok is the worst boss in the entire game, and outside of the Water Temple, I would agree. But the low gravity allows players to use the bow in the air, which makes the boss fight extremely easy. I have fought Moktarok in the depths, and don't get me wrong, it's an atrocious boss fight. I'm talking frogs level. But because of the low gravity, Moktarok doesn't really have a negative impact on the temple, unless you don't have any arrows, in which case you might as well quit the game. At the number 1 slot, we have the Wind Temple. I know it's a basic choice, but there's a plethora of reasons I like the Wind Temple so much. This is another temple where the puzzles are pretty basic, but they've got this Mission Impossible action going on, so I can't talk badly about it. If there's any downside to the puzzles in this temple, it's probably that they're the easiest. But considering this is the first temple you're meant to do, it makes sense how easy it is. The Wind Temple feels climactic and important to the story, much more than any other temple in the game, which is pretty funny considering it's supposed to be the first temple. There's not really a lot to say when it comes to the atmosphere of the Wind Temple, since it's epic and that's pretty much it. The one thing that I really think makes this temple my favorite is the boss, Colgera. This boss feels like it should be one of the last bosses in the game. It's incredibly easy to beat, but it has this huge and menacing appearance, which makes the boss fight feel that much more impactful. Despite not much going on, it feels like there's stuff happening everywhere throughout the boss fight, with the tornadoes, the wind circling around the temple, and the boss flying around. And as silly as it sounds, my favorite part about this boss fight is the soundtrack. Colgera is my favorite soundtrack in the entire game, and it doesn't even come close. The song itself has multiple references to other songs in the Zelda series, and it makes the boss fight a lot more dramatic. When I first fought this boss, I literally paused the game in order to listen to the music for a few more seconds. The Wind Temple wouldn't be the same without Colgera, but my man Lurelin is one of the all-time GOATs, and makes me like the temple a lot more.